Catherine, thank you so much for sitting down with me. Much appreciated. And you're one of the new additions to the ESA Secretariat, I should say. I find it always very great that young people are joining seed companies and seed organizations. What made you join ESA?
First of all, thank you very much, Marcel, for having me. And I want to applaud you for really speaking up for seed. The work that you're doing is quite impressive. And especially here in Europe, I think it's time for us not only to speak for seed, but to speak for science. So the article in European Seed last issue was really good. Okay, yeah, keep it up. So to start with, I think my choice of career has been quite a personal and more personal decision that I had to take. I will briefly share with you two instances that confirm that this is it. I want to work with plants. I have been brought up in Molo. It's a small village in Rift Valley in Kenya. And really brought up in a farm setup, so I'm a farm girl. And while I remember when I was a young girl, a small girl, barely 10 years of age, and we had an acre, some portion of farm where we had planted wheat. And I mean, I have schooled from wheat. We've eaten from wheat. My family has done literally everything from the farm. So this time around, I remember having had the field, the wheat field, and it was ready, and the panicles were full, and it was just ready for the harvest. And for me, it was gonna be a bumper harvest, and that was going to be really good because then we'll eat well. It will have ripple effects economic-wise and all that. So believe it or not, unfortunately, we were hiring the combine harvesters because we didn't own one. Yes. And we had to get it almost 200 kilometers away from my village. Yes. And the person who was supposed to come with the combine harvester, unfortunately, instead of the week, he postponed by a week. So he came a week later. Yeah. And it looks like heavens were not happy with us because there was downpour, heavy downpour. Yeah, and unfortunately, we lost the whole crop because by the time we came back, when we got into the field, the plants were lodged. And, vivipary, so already they were sprouting. It was a disgrace. And we couldn't even get 3 bags, if not 5 bags from a whole 10-acre piece of land. So for me, I looked at my mom's face and I told her, I saw the devastation, I saw the pain, and I said, oh, I really need to see how I can be able to at least not solve her problem, but this is something that was real. So for sure, with that, I automatically knew that this is it. I'm going to focus in plants. And this is an evidence because later on in one of my classes, when I was attending one of my classes, I realized that the solution is because of the hormones. And when the plants they sprout, and it could be avoided by the abscisic acid, which causes the seed dormancy. So if only that notion was there back then, so many years ago in my village, then we could be having varieties that are already good enough. So I think that is one of the things that really made me focus into working with plants and more so in the seed industry. And just a second instance that confirmed that this is it, this is what I want to do. While I was young, I used to try going to school, and there was a forest that we used to pass. And there was this time that there was forest fire, and the whole forest, almost the whole of it came down, and it was really devastating. And later on, when I was walking to school, I realized that there are small plants that were able, after the forest, and then, of course, it went calm. Then later on, a couple of months later, there was some sproutings of some plants. Sure. And I was shocked. I was like, how did these plants survive? There was nothing. It was bare. But all of a sudden, it's a sprouting of the plants. And for me, I was like, oof, it looks like the plants can rejuvenate. And, after the forest fire, it can come out. It can come back. So I was like, it looks like there's more to plants. They know how to defend themselves. They know how to, focus and come and fight for themselves. So with that, and later on I confirmed that really plants are able to fight for themselves, and in this case, for the fire, in the forest, it was evidenced by plant hormones. Still, the strigolactones that the plants are able. There's the correlation of in the forest, when there's forest fire,
Yes.
then normally there's carrikins is a substance from the fire, and then the interaction with the hormones by the seed, the plants, then they're able to rejuvenate, and that is the stroglactons hormone. So for me, you see, this is something quite interesting. It's something that came from when I was really a young girl, but later I realized that this is it. I want to study plants, and for sure it was not. I think it's one of the best decisions I made because it's quite impressive. The field and the experience that I'm getting and how I'm seeing that the plants, I mean, the plants can be able to really do things by themselves. It's quite impressive. So getting back to your question, I'm sorry I've gone and started from really far. So getting back to your question, what really motivated my, joining the industry is I started with, of course, after taking agriculture in my undergraduate. And then I worked for the government of Kenya as an examiner in the public sector, Kenya Plant Health Inspectorate Service.
Yes.
And while I was there, in my day-to-day activities, I was really examining varieties, different varieties, and for breeders doing the DUS examination. And for me, I think out of curiosity, I realized that, okay, what happens before the varieties come into,
Sure.
yeah. So I was like, okay, I want to know what happens before. And that led me to find myself in a class, in a Master of Plant Breeding class in La Salle, in Beauvais, France. Okay. And while I was there, I think then I realized that, okay, to make a contribution, not only at the global level, but at my community level and at my, at my village level, then for sure I have to be at the table where blueprints are being drawn. So, and when the opportunity in ESA came knocking, I really didn't think twice. I literally jumped and I was like, yes, this is it. So that's basically in brief. Yeah.
Great, wonderful story. I love it.
Thank you.
Catherine, you're now for quite some, for a little bit of time in ESA. What are the biggest topics that you're working on?
Well, in ESA, basically, I'm the technical manager, plant breeding and variety registration. And with that, then for sure, I'm representing, or rather following discussions, technical discussions in UPOV and the Community Plant Variety Organization, CPVO, on behalf of our members. Sure. So I'm really following the discussions, making sure that whatever our members, because we're representing our members, I table them on the table and vice versa, relay back the same information. So basically, that's the main, task that I'm following. But aside from that, as you are well aware, the European Seed Association has different sections. So we have this section for vegetable and ornamentals. We have the section for potatoes. We have the section for sugar beet. And now I'm responsible for the section of oil and fiber, section of cereals and pulses, and section for maize and sorghum. And by being responsible, I mean that I support the chairman to make sure that we are able to achieve the laid down agendas and the mission of the different sections. So really supporting the chair. So that is another core task that I'm following. And aside from that, you might be aware of the recent European Union Directorate General for Research and Innovation, the framework program for innovation in variety testing. And now ESA is a member in one of the consortiums that is in a project called Invite. And then I'm there representing more or less the breeders' perspective. So being there on behalf of ESA, but of course working together with my colleagues to make sure that the breeders' voice is really heard in such forums. And last but not least, I bring along the African authenticity. Yes, in terms of practical knowledge, ground experience on different topics, starting from biodiversity, seed systems, innovations, smallholder farmers. So all these discussions, the real ground experience and practical, the practicability, then for sure I bring around that. So,
staying a bit with the Invite project, I read through the project proposal, and I noticed a few, for me at least, worrying approaches. One was that certain characteristics that are normally VCU are now sort of moving into potentially into the DUS characteristics. And another worrying development would be the inclusion of heterogeneous varieties. What's your take on the proposal?
Maybe just to start a little bit, I would say that the Invite project is more or less focusing on innovation. And by innovation, it's looking at tools to actually enhance the DUS and VCU testing. And for us, I think one of the outcomes that we really anticipate in this project is to make sure that the variety listing system is actually maintained, and we follow the already trusted, well laid down system of having DUS specifically looking at the phenotypic traits. And when we're looking at VCU, we look at more of the agricultural productivity. So for sure, right now the Invite project is really at the infancy stage. We will know in the coming years. But one thing I can assure you is that as ESA, we'll follow and make sure that from the breeder's perspective, as well as a perspective that I'm sure we share with our colleagues from the examination offices, is that we want to ensure that we have a DUS based on phenotypic characteristics, and VCU focusing on agricultural performance. But of course, we have to look for quicker, more efficient, more cost-effective, and to some extent look at least supplementary issue on sustainability, that is resource use efficiency. So we want to follow and see how this discussion goes, but that is basically what we anticipate and what we are looking into.
We saw this week in several presentations and panel discussions that there is an issue with the public hostility. There is a mistrust and a movement away from science in politics, and that's of course very worrisome. Well, what's your take? How should we change that?
Wow. I wish I had an answer of an immediate answer of how we should change that. But basically, I think, first of all, the decision making in the European bodies, I consider it more of an oxymoron. And why I'm using such a strong word is because I think that the EU, and frankly speaking, this is quite personal, is known for making very, major decisions, taking major decisions. And for me, I will just highlight, I mean, there's so many major decisions that the European is known to take, but I'll just focus on our sector, on my specialty in agriculture. And you'd see that just taking back you down the history lane, when there was sugar crisis here in Europe, it was changed from relying on imports from countries that are doing sugarcane production. And the EU decided that, okay, we should have our own sugar, and that's how they ended up having sugar beets for producing sugar. So from history, you see that for me, that was a major decision a major decision that was taken to solve the European issue. And just recently, I was reading an article that was quite interesting for me. Nutella are considering, because they have a lot of imports for hazelnuts from Turkey, but then because of climate change and the wake of climate change, and now it causes the instability in prices. So they're thinking of a way of having, or not thinking, but already they're having experiments to see that they can have microclimate, having hazelnuts, plantations within the EU. So you see that these are already bold and courageous decisions when it comes to how we can solve issues. But the decision on getting back to the discussions that we had earlier, I think that the discussion is more or less focusing on the precautionary principle, and especially when it comes to innovations in agriculture and seed, the European decision-making bodies are approaching it at a more precautionary principle. So for me, that's why I realized that, okay, fine, there are some decisions that are quite, they make it like a snap of a finger, but others, like for this, it's unfortunate and it's sad that this is the direction that we are going through. And I think how we will turn it around. First of all, I think unless and until the European decision-making bodies decide that we want to look at science as a vector of change and continuous change, for that matter, then unless and until we look at it in that direction, or the European bodies look at science as a vector of continuous progress, then for sure, unfortunately, the European community will miss out on benefits of plant biotechnology. So that is quite sad. As an industry, and I'm talking following the discussions that we had today, we are already doing our part of the bargain. I mean, for me, I see it as a highway. We have to do this together. So from the industry point of view, we are already doing our part of the bargain, and I hope you are able to go to the plant breeding innovation campaign, where ESA is really on the forefront on plant breeding innovation campaign. And recently we had the innovation in rubber boots. I hope you did.
I did it,
Oh, good. So so you see, as an industry, we're already doing something. And I think that in as much as we're doing something, it's like a seesaw balance. Unless there's political goodwill, and then we do our part, for sure, one of us will always be down and the other. So it's, for me, it's more or less of a seesaw balance that we really have to see how we move forward. And this is not, I mean, for me, it's for the benefit of the society at the end of the day. It's for the benefit of food security. And when we look at EU, maybe food security looks far-fetched or far-reached. But I'll tell you one thing, Marcel, every decision that happens here has a ripple effect. So when you make a decision in Europe, it's not about Europe alone. There's ripple effects. So when you talk about food security, and we're looking at some decisions, in as much as there's enough food on the shelves currently, but a few decades ago, this was not the case here in Europe. So, I mean, there's complacency at the moment, but I'm afraid we can't afford to just play safe on this. Yeah.
No, I fully agree. Yeah.
Exactly.
If we stay a little bit with decision making in the EU, we saw last July that the European Court of Justice ruled that all products of plant breeding innovation should be regulated as GMOs. And of course, that was a perplexing decision taken by the ESA. What's your personal take on this decision?
Personal, thank you for making it sound like I can pick my brain and say exactly how I feel. Am I allowed to do that?
Yes, please, by all means.
Okay. Frankly speaking, I feel like for me, the ruling was, you're not welcome here. And I'll break it down for you. By saying you're not welcome here, rather, I am not welcome here, I'm talking about a young scientist, a young researcher, a young person who wants to look at plant science as a career. So for me, that's the first feeling that I felt, that really, as a young person, and I'm talking on a young person's point of view, I feel like it's almost like, there's a block that you're not welcome here. You cannot do, because I mean, as a young mind, and this is, as a scientist, we want to explore, we want to see how things are going. And for sure, already when there are, blockages, then it becomes really difficult. So that's the personal feeling that I really had when I had, and for me, it's a real pity. I mean, it's a real pity, because it will discourage young people from getting into the plant sciences and, more or less focus on agriculture. So it's more or less having that ripple effects and discouraging people, young people. Additionally, there are dire consequences when we look at, for example, the EU's agriculture. With time, we rather foresee it withering, And aside from that, there's also, there's in the academia, in the labs, for sure, this is devastating, because then it restricts, even we cannot be able to have research anymore. And for me, I look at science as a problem solving for the human society. So if at all we are already blocking it before we see the sun, I mean the break of day, then already we are blocking even the academia. So it's not about us as an industry alone, but it's a whole cycle, and there's so many effects of, and so many people that are really considered into that. And most importantly is also when it comes to the investments, and investment, I mean both human capacity and also research and development. So most of members of the European Seed Association would consider that, okay, fine, if we do this, there's so much hurdles to cross. So I would presume that most of the companies may consider looking elsewhere. And with this, also, I think that it will have some ripple effects also on funding of some of these research and development projects, because I don't think a citizen of the European Union would be willing to fund a project that is going to benefit agriculture in other parts of the world. So for sure, when you look at it critically, there's much more than what meets the eye. But just to be in line with the statement of the European Seed Association earlier that was released there immediately, this is purely a juridical decision. But we accept it as a juridical decision for sure. I mean, the law is the law. We respect and accept it. But then for us, the socio-economic consequences, for sure, that's unacceptable.
Yeah, clearly, I fully agree. Catherine, let's assume you have a magic wand. And what would be the 3 things that you would change in EU policy making?
Oh, that's I would, and I'm talking about the current status and the way things are. I think I'll consolidate my magic wand of 3 into 1, so one powerful.
Okay.
And I will have it as the political willpower. I'll just change, and for me, I will look at the political willpower, because it's sad to note, or rather to realize, that Europe has a wealth of experience when it comes to history in plant breeding, history in research and development in plant sciences. Talk of Wilmocher, I'm picking just when I was in my doing my plant breeding classes, those were histories that we were referring to.
Sure.
So already the EU has a history of plant breeding, and it will be sad to not have a future in plant breeding, because a lot will be saying, but that is past. But what about the future? So for me, I would really, one thing that I would look into is the political willpower, because as I've already told you, I think this is something that we as an industry are doing our part. So if we get just a boost and support from the political end, then that's okay. And also, when it comes to communication issue, I would say that we are doing our part, but of course we are doing this much, and I'm sure we can do this much. So there's room for progress and room for things that we can work on. So, but ultimately the buck stops with the political goodwill. So I think that is where the buck really stops at.
Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you so much, Marcel.